For 3 years, she held his hand in public and held another man's hand in private. For 3 years, she spoke to him softly, feeding him, guiding him, performing devotion so convincingly that everyone who watched called her an angel. For 3 years, she moved his money, built her exit, and counted down quietly to the day she would finally leave the blind man who would never know the difference. There was just one problem. He was never blind. And on the night she stood in front of 50 people and raised a glass to their love, the night she felt safest, most certain, most untouchable, the man she had underestimated for 3 years looked her dead in the eyes and said everything. This is that night. This is that story. And by the time it's over, you will never look at the people closest to you the same way again. His name is Nathan, 34 years old, quiet by nature, the kind of man who listened more than he spoke, who noticed things other people walked right past, the way someone's voice shifted when they were lying, the way a smile never quite reached the eyes of someone carrying a secret. He had built a small but successful architecture firm from nothing, the kind of business held together not just by talent, but by an almost obsessive attention to detail. His colleagues described him as calm. His friends described him as steady. And his fiancée, a woman named Camille, described him to everyone who would listen as the strongest man she had ever known. Even after everything he went through, she would say, her voice dipping into something that sounded like admiration, he never broke. Not once. What she was referring to was the accident. 18 months before Nathan and Camille got engaged, Nathan had been involved in a car collision on a wet highway outside the city. The car had spun. The airbag had deployed. And when he arrived at the hospital, the doctors had delivered a diagnosis that changed his life: severe trauma to the optic nerve, resulting in significant vision impairment. He would never see the world the way he once had. That was what everyone was told. What the doctors actually said was more complicated. The damage was real, but partial. With treatment, with time, and with certain conditions, Nathan retained far more visual capacity than his medical file suggested. Blurred shapes, movement, outlines in strong light. Not blindness in the complete sense, but something that, to a casual observer, could very convincingly look like it. The decision Nathan made in the weeks following that diagnosis was one he told no one about. Not his doctor. Not his family. Not Camille. He decided to let the world believe he was fully blind. He would learn later, much later, why he had made that choice. At the time, he told himself it was about recovery, about peace, about stepping back from a world that had been spinning too fast. But somewhere deeper, somewhere he hadn't yet found the words for, he had made the choice because he had started to notice things that made him uneasy. Small things. The kind of things you dismiss once, twice, maybe 3 times before they start to feel like a pattern. Camille had been visiting him every day at the hospital. She was attentive, warm, everything a partner should be. She brought him food. She held his hand. She cried at his bedside in a way that looked completely genuine. But there was a phone call. He had been lying still, eyes closed, when she stepped into the hallway. She had not closed the door fully. And in the hush of that hospital corridor, he had heard her voice drop into something lower, something she had never used with him. "Don't worry," she had said. "He won't know. He can't see anything." A pause. "Just be patient. I have it handled." He had kept his eyes closed. His breathing had stayed even. And his mind had gone very, very quiet. 3 months later, they were engaged. The life they built together after the accident looked, from the outside, like something worth admiring. Camille had moved into Nathan's apartment. She cooked for him, arranged his space so he could navigate it easily, guided him through crowds with a hand on his arm. Their friends watched with a kind of hushed reverence. "She's incredible," people said. "She didn't leave. She stayed." And she had. She had stayed. But Nathan was watching. Not always. Not obviously. But in the small hours, in the quiet spaces between one moment and the next, he was gathering information the way a man laying a foundation gathers stone, slowly, deliberately, one piece placed carefully on top of another. He noticed that Camille took her phone into the bathroom every single night before bed, something she had never done before the accident. He noticed that when she whispered on calls she thought he couldn't hear, her voice carried a particular tension, not the nervous energy of someone sharing gossip, but the low, controlled tone of someone managing something. He noticed that money was moving. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would ring alarm bells. Just quietly, consistently, transfers out of their joint account in amounts small enough to seem like nothing. $40 here, $80 there. But when he added them up in his head over the months, they formed a number that didn't make sense. He said nothing. He waited. And Camille, who believed with complete confidence that the man she lived with could not see the things she was doing, became less careful. The first real conversation that cracked things open happened on a Tuesday evening in early autumn. Nathan was sitting in the living room when Camille came in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, wearing that specific version of her smile, the soft, patient one she reserved for him. "You seem quiet today," she said, settling beside him on the sofa. "I was thinking," he said. "About what?" He paused the way he always did before answering, long enough for her to fill the silence if she wanted to. She didn't. She waited. "About the accident," he said finally. Her hand, which had been resting lightly on his arm, went still. "What about it?" she asked. "I've been trying to remember the drive. Before the crash. I can't get the details right." He turned his face toward her, not exactly at her, but close enough. "Do you remember what time I left that night?" "I told the police," she said. "Around 9. "Right." He nodded. "But I remember texting you from the car. Around 8:45. Telling you I'd be home by 10. "A beat." "Yes," she said. "That's what I meant. Around 9. Give or take." "Give or take," he repeated softly. The conversation moved on. But that night, after she fell asleep, Nathan lay in the dark with his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, and felt the floor beneath his life shift slightly. He had not texted her at 8:45. He had never texted her from the car. He had been testing her. And she had confirmed a memory that didn't exist. Over the following weeks, Nathan began to test more deliberately. "Camille," he said one morning over breakfast, "I've been thinking about taking some of our savings and putting it into a new account. Just for emergencies. Does that sound reasonable?" She looked up from her phone. "Of course. Whatever you think is best." "I was thinking around 12,000, he said. "Sure," she said. And then, just briefly, something crossed her face, a calculation, a flicker of something that wasn't quite agreement. That makes sense. What he did not tell her was that he had already checked the account the day before. There was no longer 12,000 to move. There was barely 7. "There's a man she meets," said his friend Marcus 2 weeks later, dropping his voice low over drinks at a bar. Marcus was the only person in Nathan's life who knew the full truth about his vision, a childhood friend, the only one Nathan had trusted. "I've seen them twice now. Coffee shop on Meridian." She parks around the corner and walks. Nathan set down his glass. "What does he look like?"
Tall.
"Well-dressed. Confident." Marcus hesitated.
"Dan?"
"You need to hear this. The last time I saw them," he touched her face. And she let him. The silence between them stretched long enough to become its own kind of answer. "Okay," Nathan said. "Okay." Marcus stared at him. "That's it." "Not yet," Nathan said quietly. "But soon. If you're still watching up to now, and we know you are, type, I'm still here in the comment section right now. Because what happens next is where everything starts to unravel. And it's going to get much, much worse before it gets better." The man's name, Nathan eventually discovered, was Victor. Victor was an investor. Charming, connected, the kind of man who wore his success without announcing it. He and Camille had known each other for 4 years, which meant they had known each other before Nathan's accident. Before Nathan's diagnosis. Before Nathan had become, in their shared private language, a man who couldn't see what was right in front of him. But there was something else. Something Marcus found when he dug a little deeper through mutual connections and quiet conversations in places where people said more than they meant to. Victor had been the one driving the second car on the night of Nathan's accident. Not drunk, not distracted, but driving. On the same wet highway. in a car that had, according to the official police report, collided with Nathan's vehicle after losing traction on the road. It had been ruled an accident. A wet road. Unfortunate timing. No fault assigned. But Nathan now sat in a room by himself and stared at the wall and thought about a phone call he had heard from a hospital bed. Don't worry. He won't know. He can't see anything. Just be patient. I have it handled. He thought about the way the human mind protects itself. He thought about how long he had been living in a house with a woman who had helped arrange the destruction of his sight, or at least had known about it and said nothing, and had used his blindness, his supposed helplessness, as a cover for something he was only now beginning to fully understand. She had stayed because leaving would have looked wrong. She had stayed because a devoted fiancé was above suspicion. And while she stayed, she had been quietly preparing the life she actually intended to live, with Victor, with Nathan's money, and with a clean exit strategy that required only one more thing.
Time.
She had been waiting for the right moment to leave. What she had not counted on was Nathan getting there first. He had been planning the engagement party for 6 weeks. That surprised everyone who knew him. Nathan, who had become so quiet and careful since the accident, who rarely suggested social gatherings, who seemed happiest in the steady routine of home. This same Nathan had started making calls, booking a restaurant, compiling a guest list with a focus and energy that moved Camille visibly. "You're sure about this?" she asked one evening, sitting across from him, her voice warm with what sounded like genuine pleasure. "A party feels like a lot." "I want to celebrate," he said simply. "Everything we've built. Everything you've done for me." He reached across the table, found her hand, held it. "You deserve it, Camille. All of it." She squeezed his hand back and smiled the smile he knew so well. "You are the most remarkable man," she said softly. He smiled back and thought, not yet, but soon. The night of the party arrived. The restaurant was warm and full. 50 people, maybe more, family on both sides, friends, colleagues, people who had watched Nathan and Camille's relationship from the beginning and come tonight to raise a glass to what they believed was a love story worth celebrating. The room hummed with the particular energy of a gathering where everyone is just a little bit happy and just a little bit wine-warmed. Camille wore a dress the color of deep water. Her hair was up. She was laughing at something her mother had said, and the sound of it moved around the room like something real. Nathan sat at the center of the table with his dark glasses on and his hands flat on the cloth. He looked, to every person in that room, like a man at peace. Marcus stood near the back wall. He caught Nathan's eye, or rather, he looked toward Nathan, not knowing whether Nathan could see him clearly from that distance. Nathan gave the smallest possible nod. Marcus straightened. The dinner moved through its courses. The speeches began. Camille's sister went first, sweet and sentimental. Then Nathan's brother, who told a story from their childhood that made the older guests laugh and the younger ones lean in. Then Victor, who was there, who had been invited, who stood to speak with the easy confidence of a man who believed himself completely safe, offered a toast to 2 people who clearly bring out the very best in each other. Nathan's jaw tightened once, then relaxed. Then Camille stood. She held her glass up and looked around the room, her eyes bright, her voice carrying that particular softness she performed so well. "I want to say something about this man," she began. "Something I've never said publicly, because some things feel too big for words." She paused. The room went quiet. When Nathan was injured, I won't pretend I wasn't afraid. I was terrified. Not for myself, for him. Because I had watched this man build a life with nothing but his own 2 hands, and I knew what it meant to him to be capable, to be independent, to be in control. Her voice dropped just slightly. "And I want him to know, I want everyone here to know, that what I feel for him has never had anything to do with what he can or cannot do. It's who he is. It's always been who he is." A few people wiped their eyes. Camille raised her glass higher. "To Nathan, the man who taught me what love truly means." The room lifted their glasses. And Nathan stood up. The movement was quiet, unhurried. He rose from his chair, and the room turned toward him with the collective warmth of a crowd expecting something tender. A few simple words, a raised glass, Maybe a moment that would be talked about for years as the sweetest thing anyone had ever witnessed. He reached up, and he removed his glasses. For a moment, nothing happened. The room held its breath in the way rooms do when something has shifted, but nobody quite understands what yet. And then Nathan looked directly at Camille. Not toward her, not in her approximate direction, but at her, into her eyes. Across the full length of the table, through the candlelight and the warmth of 50 people who were only just beginning to realize that something had gone very wrong. Camille's face drained, not slowly, all at once. The color left it the way light leaves a room when a door is shut, and she stood there holding her glass and staring at the man she had spent 3 years deceiving, and in the absolute silence of that moment she understood that the game was over. "Camille," Nathan said. His voice was steady. Completely, unnervingly steady. "I've been watching you for a long time." She opened her mouth. Nothing came. "I heard you," he said. "In the hospital. The second night. You were in the hallway, and you didn't close the door all the way." He let that settle. "Don't worry. He won't know. He can't see anything. Just be patient. I have it handled." The room was a held breath. Nobody moved. "I didn't know what that meant then," he continued. "I thought maybe I had misunderstood. I thought maybe I was wrong about you." He looked at her steadily. "I spent a long time hoping I was wrong about you." "Nathan," she started. "The money," he said quietly. $22,000 over 18 months. I want to be precise about that number, because I think precision matters right now. He looked at the guests, then back to her. "The account you've been moving it into, it's in both your name and Victor's." A sound moved through the room. Not a gasp exactly. Something lower and more collective than that. Victor, near the wall, had gone completely still. "The accident." Nathan's voice changed here. Just slightly. Just enough for the people who knew him to hear it. "You knew him before the accident. You had been seeing him for at least a year before that night. And he was the one driving the other car." He paused. "I don't know everything about that night yet, but I know enough. And so do the people I've been talking to." Camille's glass came down on the table. Her hand was shaking. "You want to know what's strange?" Nathan said. "I didn't do this out of anger. I'm not angry." And looking at him in that moment, composed, clear-eyed, with 50 people around him and his whole life spread out in the open, he appeared to be telling the truth. "I did this because I needed to see it. I needed to see you. Not the version of you that exists when you think no one is watching. The real one." "Nathan, please." Her voice cracked open. "Please." "It's not what. It is what it looks like," he said simply. "And you know it is." She looked around the room. At her parents. At her sister. At the friends who were staring at her with expressions that ranged from horror to confusion to something like grief. She looked at Victor, whose face had settled into a careful blankness, the kind that comes from years of practice at not reacting. And then she looked back at Nathan. "I loved you," she said, and she might have meant it. It might have been the truest thing she said all night. "I know," he said. "In your way. I know you did." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. His movements were measured, unhurried. He buttoned it with steady hands. "I think we're done here," he said. And he walked out. "Don't go." The money would follow naturally. The devoted fiancé would inherit everything while appearing to sacrifice everything. And Nathan, sightless and dependent, would never see what was being assembled right in front of him. Except he had. Camille did not go to prison, not initially, not on the evidence available. What she lost instead was everything she had built her life on. The reputation, the sympathy, the version of herself she had shown the world. Her family pulled away slowly, the way families do when they don't know how to hold the truth of someone they love. Victor, faced with civil liability and the possibility of criminal charges, disappeared into the kind of legal machinery that takes years to resolve. And Nathan? Nathan went back to work. He reopened his firm. He stopped pretending about his vision. He went back to his doctor and began the treatment he had declined for 3 years. His sight, it turned out, had more recovery in it than anyone had dared to hope. Not perfect, but enough. More than enough. His colleagues noticed a change in him, though they couldn't quite name it. He was the same quiet, steady man he had always been. But there was something different in the way he moved through a room now. Less careful. Less contained. Like a person who has been holding their breath for a very long time and has only just remembered that they don't have to. What do you take from a story like this? Not a simple lesson. Life rarely offers those. But there is something here worth sitting with, something about the nature of trust and what it costs to watch rather than confront, to wait rather than react, to hold steady when every instinct is pushing you toward the door. Nathan never stopped loving Camille. That is perhaps the hardest part of the whole story to hold. He had loved her before the accident, and some part of him had loved her through the 3 years of watching and waiting, even as he accumulated evidence of her betrayal. Love doesn't switch off because it should. It doesn't become simple because the situation demands simplicity. But love without honesty is just a performance. And Camille had been performing for so long that she had perhaps forgotten there was anything else. The man she thought was blind had, in fact, been watching everything. He had seen her when she was kind and when she was cold, when she was gentle and when she was calculated, when she looked at him with something real and when she looked at him like a problem to be managed. He had seen all of it. And what he had understood, what he had built his entire quiet, patient strategy upon, was something that most people learn too late, and some people never learn at all. When you believe no one is watching, you stop pretending. You stop performing the version of yourself that the world approves of, and you start living out the version that has always been true. The one that makes the choices you would never make in the light. The one that takes the thing you want without worrying about what it costs someone else. Camille had believed Nathan could not see her. And so she had shown him exactly who she was. He had just been paying attention. There is something in this story about how we see the people closest to us, or how we choose not to. How we give trust not because it has been earned, but because we are afraid of what we might find if we look too closely. Nathan had that fear too. The weeks and months of hoping he was wrong, of wanting the evidence to mean something else, of loving the version of Camille he had believed in enough to give the real one every possible benefit of the doubt. But eventually, the evidence becomes too clear to look away from. And when you finally look, really look, with clear eyes and nothing left to protect, you either break, or you find something inside yourself that has been waiting quietly for exactly that moment. Nathan found the second thing. He had always been the kind of man who saw more than he let on. The accident had taken something from him, something real, something that had genuinely cost him. But it had also given him the strangest possible gift. It had given him 3 years of invisibility, 3 years of watching without being seen, 3 years of understanding exactly what kind of person stands by you when they believe the world isn't watching. Some people show you who they are over years, he said once, much later, to someone who asked him how he had managed to stay so calm through all of it. And some people show you who they are when they think they're alone. He paused. I just made sure I was there for the second part. If this story moved you, and we believe it did, then share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Hit the like button so more people find their way to this video. And subscribe to this channel, because the stories we have coming are even more powerful than this one. See you on the next one.